LSU misses on the top quarterback in the portal. So where do they go next? We're talking about it. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, the first big domino in the transfer portal has fallen. Cincinnati quarterback Brendan Sorsby, who took 2 visits, Texas Tech and LSU, has picked the Red Raiders. Hat tip to Matt Hayes. He was the first to have it. Subsequently, all the recruiting guys had it after that it is official. He has informed both schools, Texas Tech and LSU, that he is signing with the Red Raiders and will go to Lubbock, of course, Texas Tech, in the college football playoff this year as the Big 12 champion. They had an outstanding season there with Joey McGuire. And that's certainly a big part of it, is the destination and the opportunity at the destination. But the money is going to be a part of every one of these conversations. And when you have the conversations around college football, really, you're talking about 3 schools in Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech. Those 3 have massive war chests. LSU this year is comparable. And then a school like Ohio State is lingering, and there are others sort of in that next tier. But if you're wondering how this all went, LSU did a fantastic job on this whole pitch and presentation. Sorsby visited Texas Tech on Friday when the portal opened. He got to Baton Rouge on Saturday. They took him to Supper Club on Saturday night, which is an amazing restaurant. And then his visit extended into the day and throughout the day on Sunday. As a matter of fact, you started to see some, after Saturday, 24/7 had a 100% crystal ball for Sorsby to LSU. And then as the day was going along Sunday, at some point in the late afternoon, early evening Sunday, On 3 had their prediction for Texas Tech. So you had these 2 primary scouting services with polar opposite takes. And it was interesting because I had someone, a very highly placed source in the LSU football program, tell me that when that On 3 report came out on Sunday, Sorsby was still on his LSU visit. He was still physically at football ops when that report came out. So there was no way that at that moment it was coming from Sorsby, but maybe given what was happening at Texas Tech. And what I can tell you is what most likely happened here is this was a situation where Texas Tech was willing to go further financially than LSU was. I don't know necessarily that I would say they have more. It's just, what are you willing to spend? I will tell you what I have said on the record here many times on the show is that LSU's offer for Trinidad Chambliss, provided he gets his extra year eligibility, went in the portal, is approaching $4 million, high threes, 3.8, 3.85. As I've been told, and I'm very comfortable saying that number. What I was told about Texas Tech's offer for Brendan Sorsby is it went north of $5 million. So just think about what you've seen from Trinidad Chambliss here in the amazing season he's had at Ole Miss, and you're willing to approach $4 million in that number for Chambliss. And then Sorsby, who's been the two-year starter at Cincinnati and a very good player. I'm not going to sit here and say that's no big deal. I mean, there's a reason that he's everybody's #1 quarterback in the portal. Very productive player, both with his arm and his feet. Threw for nearly 3,000 yards and over 20, nearly 30 touchdowns this year with single-digit interceptions. And he ran for nearly 600 yards. He's an outstanding player. 9 rushing touchdowns. I mean, he's an outstanding player. And there's a reason LSU wanted him badly. But I think you look and maybe say, what good does it do you if you spend so much money on a quarterback if you don't have the supporting cast around that player? It feels very similar. This conversation feels very similar to the Bryce Underwood conversation a year ago, where Underwood had been committed to. Obviously, he was a high school recruit and is a little different, but Michigan went to a place financially where it just stopped making sense, where you could pay that money, but does it make sense if paying that money disables your ability to pay the rest of the roster, build a roster around that player? And I think that's where LSU got ultimately with Sorsby. But they rolled out the red carpet. They made their pitch. And so now you pivot. And it's interesting because the other two guys are Trinidad Chambliss, at the top of the list, I should say, and then Sam Leavitt from Arizona State, who is going to visit LSU early this week. I'm told it's likely to be Tuesday. We'll see if that gets confirmed on the exact timing of all this. But the Chambliss thing is interesting because with the Sorsby news now being what we know and LSU bringing Leavitt to campus, it kind of tells you what's happening here, is that they're not convinced Chambliss is going to get their waiver. Now, I know a lot of you, and thank you for being here. And if you're an everydayer, you caught my previous episode, but the previous episode where I kind of laid out the situation with Chambliss. Now, if you want a full detailed explanation, go back to the previous episode and check that out. But the Cliff's Notes version here is Ole Miss does not believe Chambliss is going to get his waiver. I think LSU at this point also feels he is not going to get the waiver granted from the NCAA for a sixth year. And he could certainly sue. He has retained attorney Tom Mars to represent him and try to go the Diego Pavia route, but there's no guarantee that he will get that extra year. So LSU is saying, well, you'd love the opportunity to bring Trinidad Chambliss to Baton Rouge. Can you afford to wait? Because what if you go down this road and it doesn't happen and then you're left without a quarterback? LSU does not have a scholarship quarterback on the roster right now, as we've talked about. So Chambliss is a big risk if you're putting all of your eggs in that basket. So they're moving on. Now, on Sunday, attorney Tom Mars did, in fact, shared on Twitter, a letter that I think many people have maybe seen by now, but it's Tom Mars, the attorney. He posted a copy of his letter to the NCAA, essentially requesting for a second letter on behalf of Trinidad Chambliss, requesting an extra year of eligibility. So I don't think we need to go down into that rabbit hole. We've talked a lot about Chambliss and his waiver process and all. It's just uncertain that he's going to get it, so LSU has to explore other options. So the next option on the list is Sam Leavitt. Now, Leavitt is a very good player. That's a guy who started his career at Michigan State. He's been at Arizona State for the past few years, led the Sun Devils to the college football playoff in 2024, came into this season, 2025, with tons of expectation, suffered a Liz Frank injury, only played half the season. And while Leavitt is a great player and one of the top targets, the one real concern with Leavitt is that injury is going to cause him to miss spring practice. So if you're bringing in a new quarterback with a new offense, new system, new terminology, new teammates, new coaches, new everything, and he doesn't have spring practice, that really puts you at a disadvantage. Just think back to Joe Burrow in 2018. Remember, Joe Burrow committed to LSU after spring practice at Ohio State when he lost the starting job, missed out on the starting job. So Joe Burrow showed up in Baton Rouge in June. And it really was, I say this often, if you go back to 2018, Joe Burrow went the entire month of October without throwing a touchdown pass in 2018. It wasn't until you got into November and then into that Fiesta Bowl where he really hit his stride. Now, Burrow was a first-time starter. Leavitt has been a 2-year starter at Arizona State. So it's a little different scenario, I understand, but it is worth mentioning that transition with a new coach, new quarterback, and not having spring is a bit of a red flag there. Now, we did go through a couple of days ago my episode where we went through all the potential portal quarterback targets for LSU. And I told you Chambliss, Sorsby, Leavitt were the first three we mentioned. We also mentioned DJ Lagway on the list, who I think is further down the list. Now, Damon Williams from Washington was a name to watch. He's staying at the University of Washington. And another sort of longer shot that I would tell you would be CJ Bailey from NC State, who had an outstanding season this year for the Wolfpack. Their director of player personnel just recently joined Lane Kiffin's staff at LSU, working under Billy Glasscock. And so, that's one of those where he's not in the portal. And I don't know that he will go in the portal, but that's one that's sort of on the periphery where, again, you can have conversations with agents before a player goes in the portal to see what type of interest might be there. And with LSU willing to spend the money they are, clearly they're going to be competitive. But it would stand to reason that with with Sorsby picking Texas Tech, that LSU now, with the money they have to spend and the opportunity to play in Lane Kiffin's offense in the SEC and all the different variables, becomes the most attractive destination. So that's the one to watch now this week, is if LSU can get in the mix for Sam Leavitt and land him, if now, in fact, he is their top target. And as that unfolds, we'll certainly talk about it right here on Locked on LSU. Okay, I want to step aside quickly. There was another big development in the coaching saga that just won't seem to stop, as Kewan Smith was back in Oxford on Sunday. And I'll tell you why as we continue here. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new. Boost, bonuses, surprises, and it's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make the move before the window closes. So, before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour. That's every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. It's a little basketball, a little action, a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour, only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. I want to get into the staff development here with Kewan Smith in just a quick second. But again, thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked on the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, please go check out our new Everydayer Club. You get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked on LSU. It's compatible with Apple, Spotify, all the other podcast apps, and an invite to the members-only Locked on Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. So please tap the link in the show notes if you want to learn more. So Kewan Smith was back in Oxford at Ole Miss practice on Sunday, which is a wild turn from Saturday, where and before that Friday, as we saw the Ole Miss coaches that had been going back and forth sort of planted in Baton Rouge. So again, the quick catch up, if you're not familiar, there are a half dozen coaches that had been going back and forth between LSU and Ole Miss, working with the Rebels through their college football playoff run. And after the Sugar Bowl on Thursday, Friday morning, all of those Ole Miss LSU coaches that had coached Ole Miss in the bowl game were at LSU for the opening of the portal on Friday. And then into Friday night, Charlie Weiss went back to Oxford. He was the only assistant that went back to Oxford. And Saturday, Chase Parham reported that Weiss would be that Kewan Smith was not going to be coaching anymore at Ole Miss, and something that I was able to corroborate through LSU, which was that the strong feeling was that none of the coaches aside from Weiss were going to go back, that it was just going to be Charlie Weiss for the remainder of the college football playoff. And then Sunday, Ross Dellinger reports that Kewan Smith is back in Oxford at Ole Miss's practice, and and now there could be others that join the team in Tempe for the Fiesta Bowl on Thursday. I'll tell you, I'm always transparent here. I'm going to give you a very, I'm just going to give you full disclosure. And when I'm telling you, I feel like I'm reporting something to you, and when I'm giving you an opinion. And sometimes what I'm giving you is a very informed guess. Here's what I think is happening with the Kewan Smith situation. I think this is two parts. At its core, I think this revolves around Kewan Lacy. From the moment Lane Kiffin came to Baton Rouge, a big part of the magnet was going to be getting Kewan Smith and Kewan Lacy. And I've told you here for weeks that Ole Miss has a $1.8 million offer on the table for Kewan Lacy, and that LSU had every intention of beating that offer, and that Lacy has every intention of joining Kewan Smith in Baton Rouge via the portal. It's very complex now because Ole Miss is still winning, and the guys that are on the Ole Miss team that intend to go in the portal don't want to put their name in the portal right now while they're preparing for a college football playoff semifinal game. And some of the word that I've gotten out of Oxford over the weekend is that it's starting to turn a little bit with Lacy, that maybe Ole Miss is putting on a hard press to try to keep Kewan Lacy in Oxford next year. And I know this sounds, you're going to have to go with me here because I know this sounds somewhat odd because this is a different world that we're living in now with college football. We all have to sort of, I say it often, going to reprogram the way we approach these things. And because you're not talking about anything that's public, and these guys, the players and coaches aren't going to talk about it publicly, but a lot of these conversations that are had with the front office people and agents and a lot of the different representatives are being had, as you can clearly see by everything we're seeing in the portal. So, and you see some of the money that's being spent, of course, as well. So it feels like part of this is Kewan Lacy starting to turn, and Ole Miss is putting on the full court press to keep him there. I think Kevin Smith is in Oxford to try to make sure Kewan Lacy ends up in Baton Rouge. Again, I want to be clear. I'm giving you a very informed opinion. I'm not reporting news. I'm giving you my opinion. Okay, that's what I think is happening here with Kevin Smith. And so then the very obvious natural next question is, well, then why would Ole Miss let him back? Because if there's all these tampering allegations, why would Ole Miss let a coach back in the door that is there to try to recruit one of their players? Well, as I understand it, they basically have bodyguards around Kevin Smith the whole time, or Lacy, to make sure that maybe those two aren't alone in certain moments. But what I think this comes down to is the analogy I gave you a day ago, if you heard it, which was this is like that opening mediation scene of Wedding Crashers, where you're the husband and the wife are just so angry at each other that everything they're doing is just out of total spite. There's no logic. And I think that's where LSU and Ole Miss are with this situation, with Kiffin and with Pete Golding and the staffs and the boosters and the administrators and everything. Like, because think of it this way. If tomorrow all of the coaches were no longer doing double duty and they were all done, they're all at LSU, the question is going to be asked publicly, well, whose decision was it? Did Lane tell him you can't coach anymore? Or did Ole Miss say, you can't coach us anymore? We want you out of our building. Well, Pete Golding, at a press conference 48 hours ago, said that he expects these guys to be with him throughout the playoff. They all have jobs to do, and they'll do double duty. They'll be with him. So Pete Golding is saying he expects him to be with him. So we're not letting him go. And then Lane Kiffin has said publicly that he's going to let the coaches coach to try to help him win a national championship. So both of these guys publicly have said they're good with it. Privately, neither wants this to keep happening. But it's this high leverage game of chicken, and neither wants to be the one that says, yeah, we're not doing this anymore. Although very clearly, everyone involved doesn't want this arrangement to keep happening. So it is bizarre, and it feels so petty. And I am candidly ready for all of this to be over, but I don't think it will be. Based on the conversations I have with people on both sides, it feels like Ole Miss is, and I've told you this, if you're an everydayer, I have told you this for weeks now, that Ole Miss, throughout this process, is trying to embarrass Lane Kiffin. The tampering, leaking the tampering story is part of it. I told you they are going to, staff members that have come over, they're going to recruit LSU guys out of the portal. They're going to heavy recruit kids from Louisiana, and it is all in an effort to try to make Lane Kiffin look bad. And I know that sounds petty, and it is. It's very small and very petty, but that's the approach they're taking. And so I don't think any of this is going to stop. Even after Ole Miss's college football playoff run-ins, whenever that may be, maybe they lose Thursday in the semis, maybe they go on to play for the national championship. I don't know what's going to happen. But what I do believe is that all of this catty infighting between the two programs, I don't think this ends anytime soon. So we'll keep an eye on what happens with this. But the very highly placed source that I talked to on Saturday told me, barring something unforeseen, Weiss is going to be the only one going back and forth. And then a day later, that unforeseen thing had Kevin Smith back in Oxford. And I think it is directly tied to making sure Kewan Lacy ends up in Baton Rouge whenever that season ends. So we'll continue to follow that. Okay, let me knock out my final break. We'll step aside very quickly. When we come back, Some really good news for an LSU Tiger who might be a former LSU Tiger, but could again be an LSU Tiger. I'll explain. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. There's nothing like college football season. Tailgates, packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating. Long queues, logins, prices jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. Open up the Game Time app. You can see upcoming college football games. How about the college football playoff? You got 2 semifinal games coming up this week, and then the national championship game a little more than a week away. You'll be surprised at how fast it is to find great seats. And I love that you see the view from your seat before you buy, and you know the prices up front, including all the fees, and that makes the process totally stress-free. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Well, I woke up on Sunday to a text from attorney Chris Perrette, who played football at LSU. His son, Sean, is a walk-on kicker at LSU as well. And Chris is a criminal defense attorney in Baton Rouge and has been representing JT Lindsey, the LSU running back from Alexandria, who you might remember the story, was arrested back in August, and he was charged with accessory to murder, after the fact, which is a felony. And as the story goes, JT Lindsey allowed 2 young people to stay at his dorm on campus, and those 2 young people were wanted for murder. Lindsey cooperated, he turned himself in, he cooperated with authorities. He had nothing to do at all with the alleged crime, and claims he did not know that those 2 people were wanted in connection with a crime. And District Attorney Hiller Moore has agreed at this point. So, and candidly, I did text with Hiller Moore on Sunday as well, who told me, he sent me the change in booking. So he clarified there were no formal charges to dismiss. It's common to say that charges were dismissed, but there were no formal charges. He simply removed from his bond obligation, semantics. He said they're waiting on more data and information. Said he can't make a charging decision at this time until he has more info. And so they have removed JT Lindsey from his bond obligation. So JT Lindsey, and this happened actually on New Year's Eve. So when they had the conversation, and the authority to change the booking was amended on January the 2nd. So that's fantastic news. Effectively, what that means now is the charges against JT Lindsey, he's not being charged with anything. So there's an LSU rule in athletics where if a student athlete is charged with a felony, they are immediately suspended from competition. Now, they can continue attending class. They can have access to the facilities. They just can't be part of team activities. So Attorney Perrette told me on Sunday that JT Lindsey stayed enrolled at LSU. He actually made the dean's list at a 3.4 GPA during the fall semester, continued to work out at football ops, so he stayed in great shape. And throughout this process, has met with the new coaching staff, with Lane Kiffin, with running backs coach Kevin Smith, with GM Billy Glasscock, and they have offered him the opportunity to return in 2026. So remember, Lindsey was a high 4-star, a top 150 player in the country out of Alexandria when he signed with LSU for the class of 2025. He was going through fall camp at the beginning of the 25 season whenever this legal situation popped up. And then, of course, he was suspended and ended up missing the entire season. But the new coaching staff has invited Lindsey to return. This is complex because now Lindsey has entered the transfer portal. So JT Lindsey has formally put his name in the transfer portal and could find a different place to play. But like we just talked about with Kewan Lacy, the running back spot at LSU now becomes really complicated. You've made your investment in Harlem Berry to return. He's already announced that he's coming back. That's a fantastic start. They have a very sizable offer on the table, as I've told you as well, for Kewan Lacy, but that feels maybe a little less certain today than it did, say, 48, 72 hours ago, or certainly a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And then when you look at Caleb Jackson and Juwan Johnson, already entering the transfer portal, you are really thin on numbers at running back. Harlan Berry right now is your only scholarship running back on the roster. Now, the Tigers did bring in Carter Vargas from UC Davis. He visited LSU this weekend. They took him to Rufino's on Saturday night with Kevin Smith, who was in Baton Rouge Saturday night on that visit with Carter Vargas, and then the next day, Sunday, was back in Oxford. But so they brought in Carter Vargas from UC Davis on a visit. So that is a running back there. They are targeting here in the transfer portal. But you've got Harlan Berry. We'll see what happens with Kewan Lacy. They're targeting Carter Vargas in the transfer portal. And then potentially they have offered, as I don't mind reporting here, they've offered JT Lindsey the opportunity to return for 2026. They did not, remember, sign a high school running back in this recent class in the December signing period. So Harlan Berry is it right now. The Tigers have a lot of work to do. I'll continue to say, as a lot of people have asked about numbers, I do think LSU will get at or maybe over 30 total additions in this transfer portal class. And the majority of them will be on offense. I think you could realistically see single-digit defensive signees out of the portal with 20-some-odd additions offensively for LSU, because you have to remake your offensive line. You have to remake your wide receiver room. You're certainly going to add quarterbacks and very likely a running back or two here on the offensive side of the ball in this. Lane Kiffin knows what he wants. He knows stylistically what he wants to fit his offense. He's going after those players. We'll see what that means for JT Lindsey. But Carter Vargas is the running back target to keep an eye on here as the portal turns. Okay, as we have more updates, we'll certainly share them with you. So please, if you're on podcast, subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And please be sure to let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day.